Zeno-Sama!
Oh, Zhen-Jiao!
Yeah!
In the beginning of everything, before the creation of the universes, there was nothing, only emptiness. It was a very unstable dimension and very rich in unknown magic. In that, there were two races that lived at war in the void in search of the Nexus. According to the leaders of the two races, the Nexus was the source of all knowledge and power in existence. Whoever drank from the source of the Nexus would have a complete notion of time and space, which no one alive until then would have the ability to understand. In the midst of this war, there were two friends who, even though they were of different races, managed to be friends. Their name was Ozem and Zalama. Zalama was a great general of the Bakujin army. However, Zalama detested the wars against the Ramujins, as he considered this foolish war for power to be in vain, and therefore Zalama abandoned the war in the middle of it. His king was going to sentence him for deserting the war, but before Zalama was executed for good, someone appeared and saved him from death by eliminating all the soldiers who were at the place of execution. It was a Ramujin named Ozem who freed Zalama and took him to his home. Halfway through, Zalama collapsed from the wounds from the torture he had suffered while awaiting execution. After a while passed out, Zalama woke up not knowing where he was. Looking at the side, Zalama came to the conclusion that he was in Ozem's house. That is, he was in enemy territory. Zalama tried to get up but could barely do that due to his injuries. While trying to get up, a Ramujin woman appeared. The Ramujin woman looked at Zalama and said, "Wait, don't get up. Your injuries could get worse. Come on, lie down. I'll tend to your wounds," said the woman, while Zalama went back to bed completely confused and suspicious. A slightly nervous Zalama said, "No, I have to go. I'm not welcome here." Zalama explained to Ramujin, who was cleaning and bandaging his wounds. Suddenly, Ozem appeared, who responded to Zalama saying, "You are wrong. You are very welcome here. Eat this when you feel hungry," said Ozem, putting a bowl of soup next to Zalama. The Ramujin woman was Izada, wife of Ozem, who after finishing Zalama's dressings left. Bakujin sees the soup and starts to eat quickly because he was starving, and seeing this, Ozem laughs a little. Ozem says, "She is very beautiful, isn't she? She's pregnant with our first child, Zeno. But well, let's get down to business. I know you, and I know you don't want war. Believe me, neither do I. I am mounting a rebellion that will unite Bakujins and Ramujins with one purpose. We want to destroy the Nexus." Ozem explained, leaving Zalama impressed. Zalama said, "But wait, destroying the Nexus is a bad decision. It is indeed a very dangerous power in the wrong hands, but we can use it for the good of both races," said Zalama, suggesting a better idea. Ozem is impressed with Zalama's words and replies, "Yes, yes, yes. This idea is great. We could help a lot of people and put an end to wars for good. With my pregnant wife, people to shelter and protect, you know, all of this is stressful, but it's so worth it. I feel that with you by my side we can win," Ozem said, laughing nervously. Zalama claimed, saying, "I'll help you with that," said Zalama, shaking Ozem's hand, and from there a powerful alliance would emerge. Days passed and the alliance of rebels, Bakujins, and Ramujins grew even more. Zalama and Ozem together were born leaders and were managing to change the course of the war to their side. After a few days, Zalama and Ozem discovered the location of the Nexus and decided to go there to solve the whole war once and for all. But when they got there, everything was just a trap, as the coordinates passed to Zalama and Ozem were false, and it was all a plan by the kings of both races to ambush Zalama and Ozem. Seeing that situation, Ozem despaired, and while he drew his sword, Ozama said to Zalama, "We have nothing to do. We're going to have to fight." Ozem exclaimed, attacking King Ramujin, who was holding his weapon. Zalama was a little hesitant, but after thinking a little, he saw that there was no alternative but to fight for the good of the two warrior races. And he starts the fight with his sword in hand and says, "We don't need to do that. You know that," says Zalama when hitting the sword against Bakujin's leader's sword. Ozem, Zalama's only ally, retorts by saying, "Stop wasting energy trying to convince these greedy fools. Both of them are only here because they want to kill us. They will soon return to genocide," said Ozem, blocking the attack of King of Ramujin. The king of the Bakujins laughs in an evil and mocking way and looks at Zalama and says, "You are nothing but a dirty traitor. You will die together with your dreams," exclaimed the king of Bakujins, hitting Zalama's belly with a glancing blow. Ozem looks at Zalama in trouble and warns him, saying, "Focus on the battle and defeat them quickly before reinforcements arrive." Ozem exclaimed while Zalama nodded in agreement. Zalama and Ozum exchange offensive attacks against their opponents, but no one has yet taken a really powerful hit. Ozum then says, "Zalama, cover me." Ozum strikes deeply into Zalama's opponent, but the person responsible for leading the warrior race of the Ramujins goes after Ozum until Zalama removes him with a blow. Zalama laughs and says, "A great plan, I should say," exclaims Zalama after hitting his opponent. Zalama continues, "But now that we've changed opponents, we have to be careful, because we don't know his strategies," alerted Zalama to Ozum. The king of the Ramujins responds by saying, "Nothing you two insects can do can defeat us. You are just bugs in our path. Disappear," shouted the king of the Ramujins, hitting the opponent with such a powerful blow that he ripped off Zalama's left arm, who fell to the ground badly injured. In parallel to this, Ozum looks at his opponent and says, "I spent years of my life dueling against exemplary beings of their race, and I know very well how they act." Ozum spoke while defending the Bakujin leader's attacks. Thanks to the genetics of his race, Zalama manages to regenerate his arm, but he is still quite injured. After Zalama listens to what his friend said, he just agrees and says, "You're right," exclaims Zalama, speaks while attacking the opponent with incessant blows. Zalama warns Ozum, saying, "They are the heads of our races. Do not underestimate them, because there is still something really strange around here," said Zalama, slightly intrigued as he and Ozum get the better of it during the fight. After almost hours of fighting, the warriors were quite tired already, and none of the enemies had fallen. Ozum was side by side with Zalama, who, just as Ozum was very injured, the kings of their races were also very exhausted, and it was impossible to say who would be the winner of that battle. Ozum then decides to raise his sword again and advance against the two kings, who are expecting an attack from the opponents. However, suddenly something shakes the environment around and causes a huge concern to the warriors who are present there. At the same time, everyone noticed a sphere appearing in the center of the place. That was the Nexus, which had been awakened by the warriors' fight and was now there to cause big trouble. The king of the Ramujin says, "It can't be. It's magnificent," said King Ramujin, admiring the Nexus sphere and feeling its immense power. Zalama is completely paralyzed with fear and turns around saying, "We finally did it. We managed to find the Nexus," said Zalama, while Ozum was very serious. Ozum questions Zalama, saying, "Or was it the Nexus that found us?" said Ozum, completely nervous and fearing the worst. In the last episode of the saga, we see how it was in the beginning. Before creation, there were only two races that battled each other to see who would get the Nexus, which is an unimaginable source of absolute power. The Ramujins are a race in which Zeno and his family are a part. The Bakujins are an ancestral race of the Namekians and can also be known as the Golden Namekians. So in the midst of the War of the Races, Ozum and Zalama appeared. Two warriors of rival races who have banded together with the goal of using the Nexus to end the war once and for all. So both warriors warred against the king of the two races, when suddenly the Nexus appeared in the middle of the battle. So turn off the lights in your room and grab your lunch, because today's episode is starting. The king of the Ramujins turns to the Nexus admiringly and says, "Finally, I have the power to conquer everything. The power in the palm of my hands," exclaimed King Ramujin maliciously as he watched the Nexus sphere. But the king of the Bakujin interrupts him and then says, "You fool, and who said you're going to keep the power of the Nexus? You will never touch that power. Just me. Me," shouted King Bakujin, trying to catch the sphere. But as soon as he approached, the sphere reacted and began to shine brightly, and a female voice echoed through the place. The sweet voice said, "I don't see good intentions in you, which means you are not worthy," said the Nexus sphere. After saying that, the sphere eliminated the two kings at the same time, so that they simply disappeared as they were extinct from existence. Zalama and Ozum were admiring the power of the Nexus. The eyes of both warriors shone with delight, but they soon realized that they could be the next to be killed, and they knelt down helplessly before the Nexus. The Nexus floated up to the frightened warriors Zalama and Ozum and said softly, "I see bravery and good intentions in both of you, so I will deem you worthy of receiving a wish each," said the Nexus, leaving the warriors impressed and very grateful to the compassion of the entity. Then Zalama and Ozum looked at each other and nodded their heads. Ozum said, "That's more than enough. We can think about what we're going to ask for since we have time and the kings have been defeated," said Ozum, turning to his ally. Zalama then said, "What if we ask for omnipotence and omniscience?" questioned Zalama to Ozum. Ozum disagrees. "We don't need this. Remember what the goal was, and don't let greed get the best of you." Zalama responds, "But then all our goals would come true." After Zalama says that, Ozum puts his hand on Zalama's shoulder and says, "I'm sure there's a simpler way to do this. Don't risk your dignity," Ozum said, leaving Zalama slightly frustrated. After much thought, Zalama and Ozum reached a conclusion that would be good and fair for all beings of the Bakujin and Ramajin warrior races. Zalama then says, "I want to have a power that is enough to protect my people and the people that exist," exclaimed Zalama, determined. Then Ozum shouted, "I want the two people to live in prosperity with each other," wished Ozum. The Nexus then said, "If it is what you wish, it will be done," said the Nexus, disappearing, while a huge flash lit the vision of the warriors. Time passed after Ozum and Zalama's wishes, and over time the two races became accustomed to living in harmony and safety. Because of the wishes of the two brave warriors, both the Bakujins and the Ramajins managed to live in prosperity, and as time went by, new races derived from these two originals emerged and followed the same prosperous path of peace and harmony. Ozum, with his bravery and lucidity, was recognized as the newest leader of all races, but still maintained his strong and faithful friendship with Zalama, who helped him in his duty as leader, and protected innocent civilians from any evildoer that threatened peace. Among the people with the power he desired, Ozum's wife, who was previously pregnant, was now about to give birth to Ozum's first child. The woman apparently wasn't in so much pain, but was clearly bothered. Ozum stayed close by to give support, and Zalama stayed outside waiting and protecting Ozum's palace, since he was invited by his great and faithful friend Ozum. While waiting for him, Zalama became thoughtful and began to envy his friend, with whom he had battled for so long. As Ozum had a united family and had become the leader of all races, and in Zalama's view, Ozum had stayed with all merit. Even though Zalama, who was of great help, hardly gets credit for such a feat. In Zalama's opinion, he should be recognized as the hero as much as Ozum was, and should have as much authority and leadership spirit as Ozum has. Zalama then grumbles shortly, "That wretch is having a son. And I'm waiting while Ozum wins all the applause of the population. Ozum prevented me from having absolute power because he feared my power. That's the truth. Ozum will pay, and I'll get what I deserve, even if I have to take everything Ozum has," Zalama whispered, thinking of a Machiavellian idea. On the other side of the wall where Zalama was leaning, the baby had been just born, with a high-pitched, irritating cry. Parents, happy to see their first child, expressed their pride at the birth of their son, and the wife of the leader of the Ozum races said to her son, "Welcome to the world, my love. Your father and I are very proud of you. We love you, and we will take care of you with all the affection in the world." Before she could finish speaking, Ozum interrupts her with a smile. "That's right, and try to respond to our love with respect and obedience, so that we never fight," said Ozum, completely holding the child in his arms. The party continues and the child falls asleep, but by the time Ozum goes outside to show his youngest son to his friend Zalama, he is not where he should be. Worried, Ozum decides to give his son to his wife and leaves to look for Zalama, but the wife tries to stop him. "You can't go. What if something dangerous happens? I don't want my son to grow up without a father," said the wife, quite worried. Ozum just smiled. Then Ozum said, "That's exactly why I must go. If it's something dangerous, my good friend could be in trouble, and I wouldn't forgive myself if I wasn't there to help him with everything I have," exclaimed Ozum, leaving in search of his friend Zalama. Looking for him for a few minutes, Ozum finds Zalama gathering his energy alone in a deserted field. Ozum tries to approach, but Zalama shouts, "Don't come any closer, my dear friend," said Zalama in a tone of anger and irony, which left Ozum confused with the situation. Zalama then continues his aura as it begins to take on the shape of a dragon. "I fought with you. I talked with you. I thought with you. We did everything together, but only you have the credit for our battle," said Zalama, transforming. His aura got a huge shape of a dragon and started to shine, transforming into energy and gaining the shape of a shiny dragon. Zalama continued, "So to be fair, if I can't have what you have, I will take everything from you." As soon as Zalama finished saying that, the dragon materialized and Ozum prepared for a difficult attack. Ozum was confused by the whole situation and realized that Zalama had been corrupted by negative feelings and that he was determined to fight his friend, even though that was what Ozum would not like. Ozum wielded his sword, and using his energy, the key, Ozum loaded his sword and went after Zalama using a technique, teleportation. Ozum teleported and attacked the back of Zalama's head, who suffered only minor injuries. This worried Ozum, who narrowly dodged a huge blast of ki coming from Zalama. For a moment, Ozum lowered his guard and was attacked by a blow coming from Zalama's tail, which knocked Ozum to the ground with all his might. Ozum falls to the ground badly hurt and thinks to himself, "Damn it, at Zalama's current power level, I won't be able to win," thought Ozum, slightly sad, as he stood up once more wielding his sword. Ozum then pointed his sword at Zalama and shouted with all his might, saying, "I will not let you continue with your evil plans." Ozum shouted angrily, staring at Zalama. In the last episode of the saga, we see the long-awaited birth of Zeno after Zalama and Ozum have their wishes fulfilled by the Nexus. Both have become figures of respect for all races existing in the Void. However, the fact that Ozum became the leader of the Void races made Zalama jealous, because according to Zalama, he should have received more merit than he had, and this led him to challenge Ozum to a fight to the death. Who will win this duel? You'll find out about that in today's episode, but before that, turn off the lights in your room and grab your snack because today's episode is going to start. Zalama let out a roar so powerful that it devastated the area around him, and with the strength of that roar, he managed to knock Ozum down. After doing so, Zalama said, "You're no match for me in my dragon form. This is the power I wished for you. Now you will suffer a lot. A lot! And after this I will kill your son and your wife." Zalama falls into an evil laugh and again turns to his old friend Ozum and questions, "As the leader of the Ramujins and Bakujins, the king of the two warrior races can be so weak? Is it with this power that you will protect your family and your people? If that's the case, it's better for everyone if I lead them alone," said Zalama, bragging, and then attacking Ozum with the last of fire that came out of his mouth. But Ozum managed to defend himself, absorbing the blow with his sword. Ozum, with a look of disappointment, faced Zalama. Ozum kept himself calm, even though he was clearly disappointed with what Zalama had become, and with the cruel way in which Zalama was using the power he desired. Ozum felt guilty because he realized that Zalama did not have as much recognition as he deserved, although he does not justify his envious, disgusting acts. Zalama felt uncomfortable with the stillness and silence of his former friend and tried to provoke him. "What is it, Ozum? Ate your tongue?" Zalama was trying to provoke him, but even with his size, Zalama was not showing himself capable of instilling fear in Ozum. Ozum is filled with anger and indignation and replies, "I'm the one asking you, you disgusting traitor," said Ozum angrily, leaving Zalama impressed with the words spoken by his former friend. Ozum goes on to say, "You threaten my people and my family. What you're doing is unforgivable, and I want you to know something. If it's to protect my people, my wife, and my beloved son, I don't mind having to take the life of someone who was once my friend, even if it makes me suffer," said Ozum, screaming and getting a reddish aura. Ozum increases his Kaioken by 10x and goes up to Zalama, who blocks his attack with his tail and then tries to bite him with all his strength, but Ozum interrupts him with the Kaioken, blinding his opponent. Zalama is amazed at what is happening right in front of him and asks, "How come you have so many techniques and powers if you never wanted them?" asked Zalama to Ozum, who responded with hatred, "I have my means, and surely you must not know them," exclaimed Ozum, shooting a huge sphere of ki in the direction of Zalama's face, which is hit in full, which left him in a state critical. The dragon is filled with rage and strikes Ozum, making him fly away and roars, "Now you will pay, you filthy worm!" The dragon shoots a ray of energy that practically burns his enemy that luckily almost managed to dodge, causing the attack to graze. But Zalama does not stop and advances towards Ozum, firing several blasts of ki, and when he was going to hit him with his head, Ozum dodges, teleporting himself close to the neck of that draconic being who says, "I will not fall into the same game twice." One of Zalama's ki blasts hit Ozum in the face, causing Ozum to hit his opponent even harder thanks to his Kaioken and his powerful sword. Zalama is interested in the technique and says, "What an interesting power. It gives you resistance and great destructive power. You weren't going to teach me something like that, were you? So allow me to take that away from you too." Zalama uses a technique capable of weakening the target and applies it to Ozum, making him slightly weaker, and realizes that he is starting to get a little tired. Zalama fires blasts of ki from his eyes, which hit Ozum, leaving him mortally wounded and lying on the ground. Seeing the state of his old friend, Zalama begins to laugh tirelessly. Zalama tries to shoot a huge power of ki from his mouth, but Ozum teleports before he can even be hit and hides around the place where they were. Zalama can still sense Ozum's presence and so starts looking for him while Ozum is healing from his wounds. Zalama then shouts, "You can't hide for long. I will find and kill you," threatens Zalama, shooting relentless bursts of ki in all corners, leaving Ozum worried. Ozum then, after recovering a little, teleports himself to Zalama's back and attacks the dragon's neck with his sword, opening a huge wound in Zalama, who almost loses his balance and falls to the ground. Zalama then flies as much as he can and manages to knock Ozum down with his tail, making him fall off the back of his head. Ozum flies before falling and attacks again with his sword full of energy. Ozum hits Zalama's throat, who is injured and quite angry. Zalama then screams with all the hatred he had in his heart. "Die, you filthy insect!" screamed Zalama, firing the most powerful blast he could use. Ozum knew that if he was hit, he would be on the verge of death. Suddenly something appeared and blocked the attack. It was the Nexus sphere that had saved Ozum's life. Nexus then creates a force field around Zalama that would momentarily hold him while talking to Ozum, who besides being injured was very surprised to see Nexus again. Ozum looked at Nexus and asked, "You here? I didn't expect it, but I'm glad to see you. How can we beat Zalama?" questioned Ozum to Nexus while Zalama tried to free himself from the barrier created by Nexus. Nexus then in a sad and melancholic way replies, "Yes, we can win, but there is a big risk," said Nexus, leaving Ozum worried. Ozum then says, "Say," ordered serious Ozum. Nexus says, "We can use our lives to separate Zalama's soul into 7 spheres. Zalama can only physically appear when the 7 spheres are reunited, and besides being impossible, Zalama will no longer be able to use his powers. The only thing Zalama can do is grant any wish to the one who invoked it. It's the only way we can win, but it's your call," explained Nexus, leaving Ozum very thoughtful about what he was going to do. But after looking at Zalama, Ozum sees that he would have no better option than what Nexus offered and then says, "I accept, only on one condition. I want you to give all the power in the world to my son, as the wisdom possible, so that he can give our people a better future," Ozum asked from Nexus. Nexus is silent for a moment and says, "Are you sure you want that? Before you ask, yes, I can do it. But know that your child will not grow up in your presence. Are you really okay with that?" questioned Nexus, observing the serious expression of Ozum, who looked at Zalama breaking the barrier little by little. Ozum then exclaims, "Do it!" Ozum shouted when finally Zalama broke the barrier. The Nexus then began to glow, carrying the energy it possessed, and exploded immense charges of energy. Zeno in another corner next to his mother began to glow mysteriously, which left his mother worried. Returning to the Nexus that was still releasing energy, a strong white light began to resound. After moments of resonating, this Nexus light exploded and generated an intense light, consuming everything around it. Suddenly neither Ozum nor Nexus were there anymore. Zalama then started to glow too, apparently screaming in pain. Zalama then turned into 7 spheres that contained stars numbered in each sphere. The spheres were then scattered throughout existence, and thus Zalama had been defeated. At Ozum's house, the wife was watching the sky and wondering at the comets that were separating across the sky, when suddenly Ozum appeared in front of her in spectral form. That was the spirit of Ozum, who only said one thing: "Take good care of him. Our son will give birth to thousands of lives," said the ghost of Ozum, who after saying that finally rested in peace, while his wife watched him with tears in her eyes. What will happen? Will Zalama somehow manage to return, and Zeno will have to defeat him? Will Zeno actually be able to avoid being corrupted by power, and not have the same fate as Zalama? In the last episode of the saga, we had the conclusion of Zalama's frantic duel against Ozum. Zalama's power level was absurd even for Ozum, that if he continued the battle alone, he could die. However, the Nexus sphere appeared and saved Ozum's life before the worst happened to him. The Nexus stated that it could help Ozum defeat Zalama, but it would cost both Nexus and Ozum dearly. Nexus said that if both gave their lives, they could easily seal Zalama's soul in 7 spheres for all existence. Even though it was a difficult decision, Ozum accepted and thus managed to defeat Zalama. Could it be that Zalama was 100% defeated? Now that Zeno has gained his powers through his father's sacrifice, what will happen next? You'll find out about that in today's episode, but before that, turn off the lights in your room and grab your lunch because today's episode is starting. A ceremony is held with all races in honor of Ozum, the great leader of all, who gave the people freedom and happiness to live. His mother was very saddened by the death of her husband and Zeno's father. However, she was very proud of what Ozum had done and become. When Zeno grew up, she would surely tell him how amazing his father had been on that historic day. While at the funeral, Zama, Ozum's wife, had left their son with a friend so that Zeno could be safe. So Zama decided to go back home to get some rest. Before Zama could leave, someone appeared to talk to Zama. It was a Bakujin who, after approaching Zama, said, "Look, I wanted to say that I'm sorry for what happened. Ozum was a formidable person and a born leader. He died a hero, and that is how he will be remembered forever. It's a disgrace to me and all my kind what Zalama has done, but we'll be able to repay you with whatever you need."
the Bakujin said, bowing. A slightly emotional Zama replies, "It's okay. You and the others are not to blame for this. Just go home and rest," said Zama with a slight smile on his face as the Bakujin left. Two other Bakujins approached Zama to console the widow. The first one said, "Excuse me, I know it must not be a good time to talk, but we wanted to pay our respects. Losing a husband while still having a baby a few days old is not easy," said the first Bakujin. The second Bakujin continued his friend's reasoning and said, "Yes, we wanted to say that all of us in this kingdom are here to help you with whatever you need. Ozum saved us from years of war, and we are forever grateful for that," said the second Bakujin, quite emotional. Zama, with tears in her eyes, said, "Thank you both. I'm happy for the consideration you had for my husband." "Well, boys, I'll have to go. Be well and thank you so much again," said Zama, smiling and turning to leave from his house. So Zama went alone on the path that would take her back to her home, so that she could finally rest, when Zama is again interrupted by a man. But this time the man was not of the Bakujin species, but of the Ramujin. He looks to Zama with a serious face and raised his hand to greet her respectfully, saying the following words. "Hello, my name is Badom. You may have heard of me. I was a great friend of Ozum and one of the most loyal soldiers he had. Even most of the great arsenal of techniques and powers that Ozum had, I was the one who taught him. I'm very sorry for what happened. We are all down on this dark and cold night. You must be very affected, but I need to talk to you about a difficult and very important matter," said Badom to Zama, who was slightly irritated because she was stressed and very tired, and just wanted to rest next to her son. Even when stressed, Zama maintained respect and good manners, and then Zama replied, "Badom, it is a great pleasure to meet you. My husband really spoke a lot about you and always with a smile. Thank you so much for everything you did and said. I also thank you for your concern. But I must ask you to leave the conversation for another time, as I'm very tired and affected by everything that has happened here," Zama said, turning her back to return to her path and go home. But the warrior Ramujin Badom stops her, saying, "But madam, it is extremely urgent. This is of importance to all of our people. As you are now the leader of your people, you must listen to me," said Badom, trying to convince Zama, who was even more irritated. Even so, Zama still responds with delicacy, but clearly not being in his best state. "Please let me go home in peace. I just want to rest," Zama said with a sad look. Badom understood his suffering, but Badom still has something to say about what was happening. The warrior then says, "It's something that involves Zeno, his son." After Badom says that, Zama quickly turns around, pays attention. Zama says, clearly worried, and shows interest in the words that come out of the Ramujin warrior's mouth, and turns to Badom saying the following, "Be brief, please. I can't stand the death of my husband anymore. If something happens to our son, I don't know what I would be able to do," said Zama, slightly crestfallen. Badom is relieved and relaxes his body, assuming a calmer and more comforting posture, and tells Zama that he was a little less agitated and scared. The exposure of the Nexus to our plane caused an energy named Ki to spread everywhere, and it is this energy that we warriors use to fight, to use techniques and powers with a high level of destructive capacity. Before Badom could complete his reasoning, Zama interrupts him with a serious face, and already without patience says, "I said to be brief, so go straight to the point," asks Zama, irritated. Badom continues, "Sorry, but if I'm going to get straight to the point, I feel Ki inside your son. I started to feel it from the moment the golden shooting stars appeared in the sky. It is unknown what can happen if he does not know how to control it, since only the strongest warriors have the power of Ki, and Zeno is just a child. He's clearly absurd," Badom tells calmly, while Zama was slightly worried. Zama demonstrates that she is overflowing with concern and says the following, "Oh, but you don't seem so worried about it. You can tell by your face and in your voice there is something that can be done about it, isn't it, Badom?" Zama asks, leaving Badom impressed by her perception. Badom then quickly responds with a serious and confident tone. "Yes, there is something that can be done. His powers won't appear for now. It's very rare for that to happen. So there's a very simple solution. His son is destined to be the leader of our people, and it is sure to be a great and powerful leader as Ozum was. And with that power, it is clear that Zeno will be as strong as his father, or even stronger. I want to train your son, so that when Zeno grows up, he will become someone fair, to prevent the same thing that happened to Zalama from happening with his powers," explained Badom in detail, while Zama listened quite thoughtfully. Before Zama could give an answer, Badom ends by saying, "I know you don't want to expose your son to danger, but I want you to let me do this. We can't deprive the boy of potential. Go home and rest. When you have an answer, come to me," said Badom, ending the subject. Badom turns his back and walks away, leaving Zama thoughtful about what she would do. What will happen? Will Zama accept Badom's proposal and allow his son to train as a warrior, just as his father did? Will Zeno actually be able to avoid being corrupted by power and meet the same fate as Zalama? Questions like these will only be answered in the next episode, because today's episode ends here. Hey guys, I know it's sad when today's video unfortunately ends, but don't worry, because the next episodes are coming. And if you liked it, don't forget to leave your like. It helps us a lot and motivates us to continue with these videos that you like so much. Comment your theories on what might happen in the next episode and share the video with your friends so you can follow along. That's it. See you guys.